Hello, good morning. Welcome to this week's episode of Learn with Lorna. Would you believe it? We're on episode number 236. My name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service, which has 4 archive centres in the Highlands of Scotland. We have one in Inverness, one in Fort William, one in Portree and one in Wick, where we look after historic records relating to this part of the world. This series is brought to you by Highlife Highland at no cost to the viewer. Highlife Highland is a charity registered in Scotland and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in the series. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we really are grateful for that. And I know I feel like I just say that week in, week out. I really mean it. We are so grateful when donations come in. It enables us to keep doing all the things that we do. And as you've seen, if you follow our Facebook pages, this week has been particularly full of primary schools, secondary schools, talks and events. So thank you for any donations that have helped to support our work. Thank you also for the messages about last week's episode on the Mulbewey murder and the last public hanging in Inverness, the story of John Adam, Jane Brechin and Dorothy Elliott. It's a really fascinating case and one which casts a long shadow to the present day. If you didn't see it, then please do check that out. This week we are looking at something completely different. We are looking at a collection held in our Lochaber Archive Centre, so thank you to my colleague Rory for his help in pulling together some information for this one. We're looking at D54, the papers of A&J Macpherson, hirers of motors, post horses and carriages in Fort William. This collection dates from 1875 to 1926, and it comprises financial records such as ledgers, receipts and cash books, lists of the drivers for the company, the posting and hire books, and a few items of correspondence. So it's not a huge collection, but it's the sort of collection which represents the kind of businesses that all of our grandparents, relatives further back would have been so familiar with seeing and using. The sort of business that would have existed in every town, every substantial community, and something that would have been just a constant for many of our ancestors. It's also the sort of business that completely transforms as technology and innovation does. And as we'll see as we go through this episode, that transformation from moving from horses to cars to buses, moving from travel as a necessity to travel as a leisure activity. So let's start by looking at the early years and the founding of the company. The business was started by 2 brothers, Alexander, known as Sandy, and John Macpherson, the A&J of the name. Sandy was born in Arisaig in 1871, and as he grew up it became apparent very quickly that he had a particular ability and affinity with horses, and he was a skilled handler of those animals. And it was this skill which took him first from Arisaig to Fort William and then further afield to Ireland, working with and caring for horses in both of those places. After some years in Ireland where he met the woman who would become his wife, Margaret Stanley, Alexander Sandy returned to Scotland in 1901 in 1901, going on to start along with his brother John, A&J Macpherson. The company was based initially in Arisaig, operating stagecoaches to and from Fort William on the road to the Isles. But then the business moved to Fort William, where they shared premises in Gordon Square with McGregor and Cameron Carriage Hirers, a business that they would eventually take over. And we can get a sense of the business of the work that these businesses undertook in the late 1800s and early 1900s by looking at these extracts from the Highland News of the 7th of March 1931. And this extract is entitled Lochaber Postboys of 40 Years Ago. So it's written in 1931, it's looking back to the 1890s, and I think it just really gives a very good kind of visual image of what these businesses were doing and what their operations were like. And also it refers directly to the people we're looking at today. So the article says, 40 or 50 years ago, The postboys and stagecoach drivers held a very important position in Fort William and other centres of road transport like Spian Bridge, Invergarry and Ballachulish. The old stagecoaches are about blotted out of the memory of any now living, although some can remember old Duncan McMaster, one of the last veterans. Banavie could long boast of Ian McSorley, who drove Queen Victoria to Achnacarry and other interesting parts of Lochaber, while Hugh MacDonald, the Bottach, being employed in Ballachulish, drove the royal party to the study in Glencoe. The hotel stables at Corpach were in good hands, with Colin at the head and the bogey as his right-hand man. His master, having served an apprenticeship at the saddlery trade in Fort William, always appreciated a good set of harness and everything up to date. Arisaig route was opened up in the early 80s by horse vehicles, formerly the mails being conveyed by Hugh the Footpost, a distance of 40 miles from Fort William, succeeded by his son and Sandy MacGregor, both natives of Lochaber. Prior to the railway days, the capital of Lochaber had two noted posting establishments, the oldest being Hugh MacDonald's opposite the Imperial Hotel, now occupied as a garage. From the Imperial Square, mail coaches with four in hand ran regularly during the season, daily to and from Kingussie. Also a mail gig to Achnacarry, both of which carried passengers and light merchandise to the different districts en route. The other posting establishment was originally in the old fort, then quite a residential part of the town, and later at the Alexandra Hotel stables at the parade, and finally at Gordon Square. The present garage proprietor, so that's A&J Macpherson, having hailed from Arisaig when quite a lad, having undergone all the stages of Ostelrian posting, while at the present day no one has a better record for motoring in the north of Scotland, having accomplished some marvellous feats in road transport. On extra special days, such as a market or a games day, when country people would throng into town with their carts and all sorts of conveyances, the posting quarters were thronged all the time. And at time of stress, be it a noted marriage or funeral, all sorts and conditions of men were accepted for service. Some of them knew little about a horse or what was the right side of the street to take, but got rigged up in a big coat and some sort of hat. As long as it was a hat, the style or fit didn't matter. I just think that is a really lovely kind of visual image of the bustling nature of Fort William in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and the importance of these sorts of companies hiring out horses, operating stagecoaches, operating mail coaches, and so on. And in the posting book from this collection of 1875 to 1883, we get glimpses of that world and the people who occupied it. It's great to look through the British Newspaper Archive for references to these businesses, so things like adverts, because they illustrate, when you look at them across a period of time, which I did for this episode, you get a real idea of the changing nature of the business and the fact that in the late 1800s they're maybe hiring out horses, but by the mid 1900s they're hiring out, they're doing omnibus tours and all sorts of things. But they also really show the different reasons that people might have for hiring a horse or hiring a car. So for instance, in the Oban Times of the 14th of July 1906, we see MacGregor and Cameron, so this was the business that A&J Macpherson shared premises with and later bought out. MacGregor and Cameron posting masters, the stables, Gordon Square and Alexandra Hotel, Fort William. Superior horses and carriages of every description or job or hire. Pleasure drives to places of interest. Ponies for ascending Ben Nevis. Posting in all of its branches. I think we forget, even though we absolutely know how common the use of horses, of course, was through most of our history, I think sometimes we forget that all of the other documents we look at when people are going places, when they're sending letters, all of that things, that's fully based on that kind of equine landscape. Through those early years of the 20th century, A&J Macpherson changed and grew, taking over the Fort William coaching business of MacGregor and Cameron, as I've stated, and then over time gradually changing the higher side of the business from horses to cars. And we can see a look through the wages book those who worked for A&J Macpherson in those years and what they were paid. So if we just flick through some random pages, we can see James Macpherson receiving £33.11 shillings from August to December 1908. There are payments to Finlay Collins, to John McQueen, Donald Fraser, Angus McPhee, Ronald Cameron, loads of others. So if you find that you have a family member who you think maybe worked in this industry, the wages books can give you some useful information. Some of those already have small deductions taken off their wages for advances already being given. And speaking of advances, in 1903, A&J Macpherson established the first petrol pump in Lochaber, which enabled them a few years later, in 1909, to provide the first car for hire in Fort William. Now, the list of those I mentioned in the wages book, what were they doing? All these people being paid by A&J Macpherson. Well, I think likely to have involved caring for the vehicles. So first of all the horses, and then later the motor vehicles, but also driving for the company. And when we turn to the hire books, we can see who was using A&J Macpherson, all the different services, and what for. So for instance, the hire book for 1910 shows all the hires by, now I think it's Lady Abinger, but I'm annoyed with myself that I didn't check the pronunciation. I think it's Lady Abinger, at Inverlochy Castle. Now I think on a very quick calculation that this Lady Abinger at this time would be Helen Magruder, or Helen Scarlett, who was the wife of the 3rd Baron and the mother of the absolutely extraordinary Evelina Haverfield. Wait obviously till this is finished, but when this is finished, have a wee look at Evelina Haverfield. What an extraordinary woman. So I think that this is her mother listed in these hire books. So we can see, for instance, that in June 1910, Lady Abinger paid 8 shillings cash for a bus to Inverlochy Castle. That in September that year, she paid for a trip to Broadford in Skye. In July, she paid for stabling and a van to move luggage. And on the 16th of August, for 2 ponies to ascend Ben Nevis. So you really get a sense of the services that a business like this is providing to the community, from leisure to essentials, to moving goods, to moving people, to providing stabling and feeding for animals. The other thing that the hire books really illustrate, again, I've mentioned it before, is that gradual move from horses to motor vehicles. So for instance, the entries for Mrs. Cameron Lucy of Callart show multiple entries for both mixed in together. So she's hiring horses for a week or more, so there are entries for hiring those horses and for feeding them, and entries for one-off hires of motor cars or vans. They often are accompanied by a payment for the driver and the vehicle to wait all day. So it's a kind of snapshot of that movement, that if you're using it for a week, you're still going to hire a horse. If you have one long journey to go on, maybe you splash out and you hire a car and you pay it to wait for you while you do whatever it is you're doing. There are many prominent Lochaber families represented within these hire books. So for instance, there's a page for Lady Hermione Cameron, wife of Donald Cameron of Lochiel, the 25th chief of Clan Cameron. On the 1st of June 1911, she hired a landau to take her to Achnacarry, the Lochiel home. On the 17th of August that year, she hired a motor from Corpach to Fort William and back. And again, her entries include not only horses and cars, but also a lorry. I don't know why. It's funny, when I looked at that, when I was looking at that particular page, that's the same Lady Hermione Cameron to whom Donald would write a couple of years later about the death of his brother Alan Cameron during World War I. It's a letter that I've referenced a lot over the years, but it was just interesting to me as soon as I looked at that page to see her name and all these things she's doing in 1911, hiring cars and going on day trips and hiring horses. And I just thought, yeah, in a couple of years, all of your lives are going to be changed so much by the outbreak of World War I. It's really a moment in time before that huge calamity changed everything. The page for N.B. Mackenzie shows not only hires to Ballachulish, Roybridge, Corran, Ardgour, Fassifern and other places, but also regular payments for 2 and 6 for horse riding, which I thought was interesting. They're almost weekly payments for horse riding. So I don't know, I assume were they lessons, or were they just hiring the horse out for use? I don't know. Now, 1911, which is some of those entries I've been talking about, 1911 was a dramatic year for vehicles in Fort William, because it was famously the year that a Model T Ford drove to the summit of Ben Nevis and back. It's undoubtedly a remarkable feat. It happened over a few days. It was, as you would imagine, a huge publicity triumph for Ford, because it's remarkable to think that this car could do this. But it's definitely an odd thing for us to watch now from a conservation perspective. There's a great video of this on YouTube if you have a look after this. That's another thing you have to look for after this episode. But if you have a wee look at that footage of the car going up Ben Nevis, it's completely extraordinary. But from our perspective, I think, looking at it, they dynamite little bits of the hill landscape to get the car through. They're driving right across the hilltop, and so it's quite an odd thing for us, I think, to go, what a strange thing to do, but a huge feat. Now, I mentioned that A&J Macpherson hired out ponies to take people up Ben Nevis, and I believe that they also supplied a number to accompany that historic ascent of Ben Nevis in 1911. So we can see who's hiring the vehicles and what they're hiring them for. But we can also see that not everyone was happy with the prices quoted, as one piece of correspondence in this collection shows. This slightly stroppy sounding letter was sent in 1916 from Lord Henry Neville, later would become the 3rd Marquess of Abergavenny, from Eridge Castle in Tunbridge Wells, written to A&J Macpherson. Now, anyone in the UK might appreciate, as I did, the fact that this letter was written from Tunbridge Wells. Eridge Castle, Tunbridge Wells, Sussex, 2nd of August 1916. Messrs Macpherson. I received your letter of the 31st of July today, quoting £10 per week for hire of a pair of horses and wagonette. You to supply the forage, and I to find the driver board and lodging. This is of course a very high charge, and considering the light work, probably 4 or 5 days a week to the station and back, probably only 3, I think £8 a week would have been a fair charge, considering also the fact that the hire will be for 8 or 9 weeks most probably. Well, anyway, I shall want the horse, brake and man for 4 to 5 weeks, certainly, provided I'm satisfied with them. If I recollect right, the station is about 5 miles from the house, and it's a very fair road. I asked for a brake to carry 8, not a small wagonette. If wet, there is an omnibus at Carrower that can be used. The horses should be big, strong and active. Please arrange to have the brake and pair meet me and servants at Carrower Station on Saturday, August the 11th at 10:30 a.m. I think the train is due. Kindly acknowledge this to Eridge Castle, Henry Neville. So he does sound slightly unhappy. Now, I went and googled what Eridge Castle looked like, and I have a sneaking suspicion that he probably could have afforded the amount that was quoted. It's accompanied by a response noting that they have received the letter and they will provide the horses as requested, but as forage is so much dearer than it used to be, that it will be impossible for them to make a reduction on the cost. I think that's what it says. It's written right across a faded crease in the paper, but I think that they say that they're not going to make a reduction. This collection also includes a letter from 1925-26 in which S. Gilchrist from Giffnock in Glasgow tries very, very hard to make A&J Macpherson become stockists of FN motors, sending them the specs and the prices for the 1925 chassis along with this letter. A letter from the FN Northern representative to the motor traders in his territory. Gentlemen, in New Zealand about 17 years ago, FN cars greatly impressed me. Their usage was severe, yet repair bills were small and efficiency always consistent. FN cars, in the forefront of good cars in 1900, are today maintaining their superiority, and the 1925 models are very attractive indeed. The engines, beautifully balanced, have no annoying periods. Their acceleration is wonderful. Gears are silent and easily selected. The light steering and FWB add considerably to your customers' enjoyment. There's tremendous life about all the new FNs, yet they have a smoothness and silence at all speeds possessed by few cars. These are a few of the many points that made me decide on the FN representation. They are cars you can rely on at all times and are backed by a business policy that few agents today can afford to neglect. This policy has been constructed with a view to assigning the agent and ourselves to secure good and lasting business. There are no annoying clauses, no troublesome rebates, absurd deposits, or guaranteed quantities to worry you. It will pay you to sell FN cars. The discount is exceptionally liberal, and you would have the security of closed territory, good advertising, and my wholehearted cooperation at all times. I am using at present the 1015 horsepower model 4-seater, and I would like to give you half an hour at the wheel. Its performance will prove that I have been modest in my claims. We could then have a chat about that attractive and generous policy I've told you a little about. Arrangements can be made on the enclosed postcard at your convenience. Yours very truly. So, trying very, very hard to get them to stock that vehicle. Newspapers from the 1930s, if we move on slightly, show that A&J Macpherson were then running a bus service from Achnacarry to Fort William and back, having taken over the route from Mr. R. Campbell. In 1936, in case you're interested, you could get from Fort William to Banavie for 4p or to Achnacarry for 2 shillings or 3 and 6 return. But the transport business can be controversial in the Highlands and Islands. And the 1930s was also a time for discussion about the need or otherwise for Sunday excursions. So is there a need for leisure trips as opposed to essential, necessitous trips? The Northern Chronicle of 1934 has a headline on 7th of February, has a headline that shouts out Sunday bus excursion war. Strong protests by county councils, evidence before the traffic commissioners, applications reasonable and desirable. So you can see immediately that it is it's a controversial subject, running transport in the Highlands and Islands. The article is long and I'm not going to read it all, but it opens like this. The opposition of 5 Highland counties, Inverness-shire, Nairnshire, Ross-shire, Sutherland and Caithness, to applications by 65 Scottish and English bus owners to run Sunday excursions in their area led to a great legal battle before the traffic commissioners for the northern area at Inverness on Thursday and Friday. Evidence was heard of both parties, and on Sunday the decision was announced. As I say, the article is long, but it's really fascinating. It was noted that many of the companies wanting to host tours came from out with the Highlands and Islands, and they wanted licences to be able to do this. And that those objecting to the Sunday tours, including the Lord's Day Society and the county councils, they hadn't objected in time, so adverts for the tours had gone out, including all over America, which I found quite remarkable. And they say it would simply mean chaos to the touring industry of Great Britain if the arrangements were upset now, and it might result in a permanent diminution of the number of people who come to Scotland for tours. And Mr. Curry, who represented the travel companies, which included A&J Macpherson, requested that all licences just be granted that year, and that a more fuller discussion and a more timely discussion should be held the following year. The meeting seems to have been quite acrimonious. There are arguments heard on both sides, including this. Lochiel, Lochiel, the convener of the Inverness County Council, submitted objections on behalf of that council, which, by 22 votes to 8, agreed to make representation on behalf of the northern branch of the Lord's Day Observance Society. Their ground was that Sunday bus excursions were a violation of the feeling of the majority of ratepayers. Lochiel, after stating that he was not expressing his own personal views, said that the general feeling was that these excursions on Sundays were most objectionable. In the Highlands, Sunday was still, regarded as a day of rest and quiet, to be devoted to worship. Highlanders strongly resented having their day of rest disturbed by incursions of noisy outsiders who had no respect either for Sunday itself or for people who regarded Sunday as a day of rest dedicated to the Almighty. These excursions were quite unnecessary and served no public purpose whatever. They had no objection to the ordinary Sunday buses, and people who wished to travel on Sunday could avail themselves of these. The excursionists brought by excursion buses were frequently most objectionable and wandered all over the place, destroying the privacy of the inhabitants. After all, they had another 6 days in which to come and see the beauty of the Highlands. Surely they could leave the Highlands quiet and peaceful for one day in the week. It goes on to say, it might be argued that Highlanders were behind the times and out of date in observing Sunday the way they do. Surely, says Lochiel, we are not asking any more than that the same privileges should be extended to those who hold religious views as we extend to those who are not Christians. There is an old saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. I am simply asking that the commissioners apply that rule to Scotland, to Sunday bus excursions, and to when in the Highlands do as the Highlanders do, and observe Sunday as a day of rest. Lochiel added that the County Council equally objected to applicants from inside the county as well as outside operating. There are some strong quotes in this article about Christianity being a minority, about what it means to be a good Christian. Can you be a good Christian if you do something on a Sunday? It's just very interesting how heated the conversation was. One of the parts of the evidence reads, Mr. Beauchamp maintained that the objections were religious and therefore out with the powers of the travel commissioners. Every man was entitled to his own religious beliefs, whether he be Jew or Gentile, and whether he wished to go for a tour on a Sunday afternoon or stayed in his house. There were thousands of God-fearing men and women who went for Sunday excursions. Was their freedom to be curtailed by the wishes of a few? By doing so, they would make one law for the rich and one for the poor. The commissioners were there not to interpret divine law, but the law laid down by the Road Traffic Act. There was nothing in the Act against the running of buses on Sundays. Mr. Witherspoon, on behalf of A&J Macpherson, Fort William, said it had been admitted that there were no complaints about the conduct of Sunday tours in that area, and their tours all operated from Fort William. In the end, the meeting found in favour of the excursion companies. In 1937, it was a different problem that was being discussed when A&J Macpherson approached the Northern Traffic Commissioners. This time they were arguing against Messrs David McBrain being given licences to run tours from Fort William to Glen Nevis, Achnacarry, Glencoe and Glenfinnan. They were arguing that they already provided sufficient tours and that giving McBrain a licence again would squeeze them out. And Donald Macpherson, a member of the firm, gave evidence to the effect that during July to September of 1936, the previous year, he had made observations from his office overlooking Gordon Square. He notes that he had watched the McBrain coaches. According to his calculations, the number of seats offered by Messrs McBrain for the four tours during August, there was capacity of 2,238, of which 435 were occupied. The corresponding number offered by A&J Macpherson was 3,128, of which 738 were occupied. So neither are full because there's too much on offer. Mr. Macpherson spoke of various occasions when he alleged that no McBrain coach appeared at the time when the tour was due to start, and of others when no passengers appeared. All of that was refuted by McBrain's. But there were also less fractious times for the company, as this piece from the Oban Times of 1937, 16th of October, shows. New bus service inaugurated. The beautiful road to the Isles was at its most picturesque on Monday, and lay bathed in golden sunshine as the handsome motor buses of Messrs A&J Macpherson set out from Fort William on the first run of the new service between Fort William and Glenfinnan. Mr. Alex Macpherson, the last surviving driver of the coach and pair days, drove the first bus, which contained a full complement of passengers. When he was a lad 55 years ago, Mr. Macpherson drove a coach and pair from Fort William to Arisaig, a distance of 36 miles, 3 times a week, changing horses at the Stagehouse Inn, Glenfinnan, close to the spot where Prince Charlie raised the Jacobite standard in 1745. Mr. Macpherson was on the road 19 years before the Fort William to Mallig railway line was built. "We thought nothing of a long journey over the rough roads in all sorts of weather," he told a reporter. Mr. Joe Macpherson, a son of one of the founders of the firm of Messrs A&J Macpherson, said that they hoped that this was the first stage on a through bus service to Malig. So they're at the forefront again. They are changing, adapting the business to what is needed. In June 1939, the Highland News reported, or the Highland Times, reported that Messrs David McBrain Limited had purchased the business of A&J Macpherson, excluding the licences for excursions and tours. Other parts of the business would remain under the name A&J Macpherson for years to come, and I'm sure that some people will remember them from the 1950s and 60s. But I want to finish this episode with two articles, both from 1947, one from the 27th of September and one from the 6th of December, because I started the story with the birth and young years of Alex Macpherson, Sandy Macpherson, and so I want to finish in 1947. There was a very happy gathering at the Station Hotel, Fort William, on Monday evening, when relatives, children and grandchildren and many friends came together to celebrate the golden wedding of Mr. and Mrs. Alexander Macpherson, Avondale, Fort William. Amid congratulation, the bridal couple cut their wedding cake and then were entertained to dinner, at which speeches were made by their sons, sons-in-law and friends, all of whom bore witness to their popularity in the community. Chief among the speakers were Councillor McFarlane, the Right Reverend McMaster, Mr. James Weir Annett, the Reverend Father McKellig, Mr. Page Gentles, ex-Provost Blair, Mr. Duncan Grant and Mr. Alan MacDonnell. Stories of the old days in Fort William were recalled, especially by Mr. James Weir, who said that his first sight of Sandy Macpherson was in Glenfinnan, when, as a strapper, he had to stand on an empty barrel to put the reins on the horse's head. Horses were Mr. Macpherson's passion, and when he left his native Arrasig for Fort William, he entered the coach service between these two places. Later he went to Ireland as a coachman to the whisky firm of Dunvilles, and it was while in the Emerald Isle that he met the lady who would become his wife. On their return to Lochaber, Mr. Macpherson became coachman to the firm of Messrs D.P. MacDonald and Sons, but shortly afterwards he and his brother took over the coaching business of McGregor and Cameron, and from that day he never looked back. To him goes the credit of owning the first car for hire in the Wide district, for at one time the nearest car hirers lived in Oban in one direction and Inverness in the other. From hiring it was but a step to bus tours, and in this way much of the beauty of Lochaber was opened up to the visitor. Indeed, said Mr. Weir, what McBrain's was to the Highland, Sandy Macpherson was to Lochaber. Again, the first petrol pump in the district was put up by his firm, and later the first electric pump. A few years ago, the bus touring business was sold. Many kind and affectionate things were said also of Mrs. Macpherson, whose main interests in life are her children, her grandchildren, and her church. 9 sons and daughters had been born to her, one dying in childhood, and today there were 21 grandchildren, the youngest of whom is a fortnight old. 7 sons and daughters were present round the table, the eldest son alone being unable to make it. Speeches having been made, toasts honoured, telegrams coming from as far apart as Ireland and Iraq were read. The evening settled down to a real ceilidh, and Mrs. Macpherson was cheered as she stepped out in a Highland scuttish. And it was the wee small hours before the happy couple said goodbye to their guests. That Mr. and Mrs. Macpherson may have many happy and long years before them and live to celebrate their diamond wedding is the wish of their friends over a wide area. But unfortunately that last wish right at the end was not to come true, as the article just from a few weeks later shows, and I'm just going to share a couple of extracts. It is with regret, so this is, the last one was 27th of September, this one is the 6th of December. It's with deep regret that we record the passing of one of Fort William's best known natives, who was held in respect and affection by a wide circle of friends. Mr. Alex Macpherson, Mr. Macpherson, who was 75, died at his home after a short illness last week. Despite his years, he never outgrew his boyhood heart, and it was a delight to hear his tales of life in Fort William in the past, when the days went by at an unhurried pace, and when there was always time for a cheery ceilidh and a practical joke. It was Mr. Macpherson, though, who helped to put an end to the quiet tenure of life in Lochaber, for he was a pioneer in the introduction of the petrol engine to this district. When he returned to Fort William, he took over with his brother the coaching business of McGregor and Cameron, and he had many thrilling tales to tell of the arduous and physical risks of transporting passengers by horse-drawn coach through snow-clad wastelands. He was quick to see the possibilities of the petrol engine in the transport business, and as well as introducing the first car, he introduced the first petrol pump to the district. His hiring business gradually changed from horses to cars and buses, and it was in comparatively recent years that he sold his interest to Messrs. McBrain. In the days of his leisure, his affections went back to horses, and it was a real pleasure to see his upright, stalwart figure astride a trotting horse. It will be difficult to fill his place in the community, this kindly and lovable man, who even in his advancing years retained a young and unsullied heart of a boy. The loss to his widow, his sons and his daughters is beyond compare. Interestingly, that obituary is followed immediately afterwards by an obituary for one of his staff, who had also died after a life of working across that change between horse-drawn vehicles and motor vehicles. So, as I say, a collection we don't have a vast amount for, but it's a collection that is the sort of business that all of our ancestors in this country would have used all the time and been so familiar with big figures in their community. So thank you for joining me this week. I hope you can join me next week. Next week I'll be looking at World War I in the County Clerk's papers, some really interesting documents within that series. A reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland's a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I'm really glad you enjoyed it.